Happy Moral Monday, everyone. Now, if you're confused about what that means, just take a trip down to North Carolina, where for the last 13 Mondays, thousands of demonstrators have taken to the streets to protest a whole host of North Carolina laws. Just last week, for example, North Carolina legislature passed what law experts have characterized as the most draconian ruling on registration and voting in the country. But this isn't the only contentious piece of legislation that's come up this year. Republican Governor Pat McCrory has signed off on a myriad of controversial bills, including one that completely slashes unemployment benefits and another that abolishes teacher tenure. All of this points to what many, including the New York Times, are calling, quote, the decline of North Carolina. So what exactly is going on in the state? And are these Moral Mondays doing anything to turn the tide? To talk about this and more, I spoke earlier with John Fortenberry, an activist and independent journalist who's been closely following these demonstrations. I first asked him what the spark was that took the people to the streets in the first place. Check it out.
Well, I believe the voter ID law is really what sparked the whole movement. But it's been in planning for a while. The Reverend Dr. Barber, who leads the protest movement, he's actually been working on building a progressive coalition for a number of years now. And as soon as this legislation was put forth, it was sort of just like, you know, the final straw for us to organize together.
So yeah, so this started with these voter ID laws. What exactly were the changes that these ID laws entailed that got people so riled up in the first place?
Well, they're basically trying to make you have a government-issued ID to vote, which is going to make it harder for young people, minorities, poor, elderly to be able to even vote. And all the while, there's no evidence of voter fraud that's occurring in our state. And it's going to make it hard for the 318,000 North Carolinians without a valid ID in the state.
Right, and I mean, from what I understand, it's almost a non-issue. It's a solution looking for a problem. But I want to ask you something about the actual name of these protests. They're called Moral Mondays. Is there any special significance behind why they're called this and why they're taking place on Mondays?
Well, Moral Mondays, the day Monday doesn't have any significance, but Moral Mondays, we really just wanted to make it to present a challenge, a moral challenge to the immoral policies that have passed since this new legislator has taken office. And we wanted to dramatize the shameful condition of our state through, a moral challenge to these policies.
And this is something that I really find it very surprising that it's not getting a whole lot of corporate media attention. I've been wanting to cover this for a while now. You being in the state, I follow you on social media and you're always posting about this. But one thing that I found very interesting is how many people have actually been arrested in connection to this. Every week more people are showing up to these events, and the number of people that have been arrested since April, it's reaching almost 1,000 people. John, why so many arrests?
Well, I think, North Carolinians have decided to come together and stand up for everyone's rights and not just the rights of a few. And so the civil disobedience movement that has now almost 1,000 people arrested in 3 months is just a sign to our state that we're united together and we're going to move forward together.
Now, you mentioned something really interesting, that, the catalyst for this, like you said, was these voter ID laws. But, it's clear that at this point, with so many hundreds of people joining in this movement, this goes far beyond these voter ID laws and voting rights laws. Can you talk about what the other issues are that people are coming out, into the street and speaking out against?
Oh, yeah. Well, it would be a whole show to talk about every issue, but there are plenty of issues to go around. You can start with the cuts to public education, shifting $90 million to voucher schools, not giving teachers a raise in 5 years. Basically, we're putting us last in teacher pay and teacher quality in the entire United States. We've cut unemployment insurance. We've got a new tax plan that gives cuts to the wealthy while raising taxes on 95% of North Carolinians. All the while, Governor McCrory has given his cabinet a pay increase. Our state legislators have refused to expand Medicaid to, I think it's 500,000 North Carolinians. There's assaults on women's reproductive rights, assaults on equality,
Yeah,
the environment.
it sounds like the list goes on, you know, from social programs to changes in taxes. There's things, you know, radically changing the racial disparity for death penalty. I mean, like you said, I think we'd have to spend the entire show talking about this. I know that you focus specifically on schools and teachers. That's something that you write a lot about. But I want to ask about the effectiveness of these protests, of these Moral Mondays. From your experience, from what you've been observing, has there been any change as a result of these demonstrations?
Well, there hasn't been any change by the policies that have made it into law, but there has been a change in our movement. We are more organized than we were, say, in 2008 or 2012 even. And we're starting to realize the diversity of our coalition and how we can work together to move our nation and our state forward.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, I was at Occupy Wall Street. It seems that a lot of the roots of what's going on in North Carolina seems to kind of, it's very grassroots, it's very dynamic, it's very eclectic. And I mean, it's sad to hear that, you know, within its 13th week, it's not getting the traction within, you know, making legislative changes that it should. But I understand that, you know, there's a lot of special interests at play here that you're fighting against. Can you talk about what some of these special interests are that might be derailing the opposition to the government in North Carolina?
Sure. There's many special interests to go around, including, you know, Duke Energy, the big power company here in North Carolina. They want to make it easier for themselves to do business and kind of limit environmental regulations. You've got groups like, you know, Americans for Prosperity, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and other groups who are very right-wing in their ideologies, and
yeah, it's
really
hard to fight these. It's hard to fight these strong groups that are kind of you know, on the side of the political establishment. John, I do want to ask you, you know, to get your take. North Carolina, traditionally, it's been more of a moderate state compared to a lot of its southern counterparts. You know, what do you think is causing this recent surge in conservatism? And I know that it's not only happening in North Carolina, but it's happening in several other places. But what do you think is causing this recent surge?
Well, I think, you know, it's a reaction. First off, to the election of President Obama. And then I also feel that it's, to many conservatives, it's a perceived threat. They feel their religion is under fire. And so it's really, it sort of reminds me of the Redeemer movement in the South back in the early 1900s, when actually Democrats at the time redeemed the South in favor of white people and white dominance. That seems to be how these guys are doing things today.
Yeah, and John, these protests are now, you know, being Monday today, there was a large protest being organized in Asheville. So it's obvious that these protests are expanding far beyond just Charlotte, where they were isolated before. They're in other parts of the state. Is that the goal with this movement, to kind of make it a statewide movement?
Yeah, so after the last Moral Monday, our mission became to localize this effort. And so what we're going to be doing in Boone, North Carolina, as well as Asheville, Charlotte, Raleigh, Chapel Hill, everywhere else across the state, is to focus heavily on voter registration drives, and then secondly on voter information. We want to inform people of the decisions that have been made, and let people know that this is what happens when you don't show up to vote in state elections. We can't just sit by idly and only vote in presidential elections. We need to realize the importance of every election.
Right, and I know that you're doing a lot of good work out in North Carolina, trying to kind of rally support for this movement. John, for those, you know, it's clear that this type of extreme legislation isn't happening only in North Carolina. For people that want to kind of learn a little bit more about these policies in the state, maybe their state, and how they could get involved and learn more about Moral Mondays in North Carolina, where can they find this information?
Well, there's a Facebook site, Moral Monday. And you can also go to the North Carolina NAACP website to find out more about the local organizing. We also have various committees throughout the state. In Boone, we have the Boone Direct Action Committee, where we'll be focusing on getting out the vote, registering voters, and informing voters of the decisions they have before them.
John, thank you so much for your time and stopping by today. That was John Fortenberry, activist and independent journalist in North Carolina. Thanks again.